Hey everyone, this is Zero X Nguyen from runebase.org. Runebase.org is your source for learning about decentralized finance, the THORCHain protocol, and the THORCHain ecosystem at large. On this podcast, I have the pleasure of interviewing developers and engineers and community members that are working on all parts of the decentralized finance ecosystem. Today, I was joined by Mitchell, the founder and CEO of Immunifi. You guys might have heard of Immunifi. They are a key part of THORCHain's 5-point plan as THORCHain recovers from the July attacks and charts its course forward. Immunifi runs bug bounty programs, and bug bounty programs simply incentivize white hat and gray hat hackers to responsibly report vulnerabilities that they find in different protocols in exchange for a reward. Mitchell and I talked about his story and his background. We talked about what are bounty programs and what role they play in strengthening and hardening a network security. We talk about Immunifi and what makes them different, what makes them special. We talk about their path to decentralization and what they got on the road. We also dive deep into exactly what their engagement is with THORCHain and how this is going to help the THORCHain ecosystem become stronger. We had a great conversation. Mitchell is an extremely well-spoken and intelligent founder of this system. And so we're extremely grateful for the work that he's doing. We hope you enjoy the episode. If you like what you hear, please like and subscribe on YouTube or your podcast app of choice. Leave us a review. All your reviews help us reach more people and reach a broader audience so that we can spread the word about THORCHain and DeFi to more people. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on the inside. Bye. Guys, today I'm happy to be joined by Mitchell, the founder and CEO of Immunifi. Mitchell, thanks for hopping on with us.
Thanks, man. Glad to be here.
Pleasure to have you. I guess like most stories, it's great to start with your background. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and how you first got into crypto?
That's a good question. So I was, an early crypto kid. I was a fan of Ron Paul way back in the early 2010s. Yeah. So one of those, at that time I was studying poli-sci in school and surrounded by socialist thinkers, economists, and studying all this stuff, trying to figure out, okay, well, what actually works? How does the economy work? Why does my social system work the way it does? Why do I have, my class, my position in society? And in the course of that, all my libertarian friends were like, no, bro, the system's wrong. It's wrong because they messed up money, yo. And I'm like, okay, tell me more. And in the course of that, I learned about Bitcoin. I didn't really understand anything about it, but I knew looking at the architecture of it and the consequence it was having on the people around me, this was going to be a remarkable social innovation. So at that point, I became a hobbyist. I was like, this is going to be amazing. I'm not a super technical person. I don't really understand how it's involved, but I understand that there are implications to this socially and politically as to what the future will look like. Speed ahead to 2014, 2015, I make the dive. I go into crypto full time. And at that point, it was just a bunch of nerds, myself included. And I happened to be, the most social of the group. Started working with something called NXT, the NXT Foundation, which is a forerunner to a bunch of projects like Waves, like NEM, like Lisk, like IOTA. Then moved on to Steemit. I ran the marketing at Steemit Inc. to build the whole user base for the Steem blockchain. So that was a big social media Reddit-like product with a incentive mechanism to drive high quality content filtering, which, ended up having some very interesting and curious deficits. Ended up working with a lot of other projects in this space as well, like sampling on data feeds, Decentraland, getting that out the door, just to make people aware of what the metaverse could do, SingularityNet, saying, hey, we should bring other kinds of infrastructure, including this like computational heavy stuff like machine learning algorithms. We should bring that on chain by creating some kind of market. I think that makes sense, as opposed to some of the other ones that dominate today, and they're all gated, all walled gardens. But always, every step you do that, you get more and more in until it's just your life.
As you made that dive into crypto from 2015 into today, where did Immunifi emerge? And actually, can you give us a quick bit of background before we dive into that? What is Immunifi today? And then I'd love to hear the origin story of it.
Sure. So Immunifi is the the leading bug bounty platform and service in crypto. We specialize primarily in decentralized finance applications, but we also deal with L1s, L2s, even some centralized exchanges and handling their security. Our big forte, though, is smart contract and dApps. And the simple version of what we do, what a bug bounty means in crypto, is we incentivize an army of security personnel, hopefully white hat hackers, gray hat hackers, anyone who'll do the work, to find, to source, to find, to disclose high quality vulnerabilities in people's code. We provide the marketplace, the mechanisms for disclosure, and all the support to make the transaction possible to say, hey, look, if you bring us a high value vulnerability, we'll make sure you get paid by the project in question and help run that whole program for them. So that's the short version of what Immunifi is today. As to origin story, Immunifi is really the product of my own problems and discoveries. Working in the space for a long time, I've seen a lot of attacks, everything from wrench attacks to, good friends of mine getting SIM swapped, to attacks on exchanges, to attacks on infrastructure. And if you're on the inside, it's something that's never really ending. And it's never really stopped. Like now we're seeing with all these DeFi hacks that it's exploding in size, but you were still seeing, in terms of public examples, hundreds of millions of dollars stolen every year for the last 5 years off exchanges. Those are probably billions of dollars, but you don't always know if an exchange is solvent. So we've had this problem a long time. And if you've been operating companies or projects in this space, you know what it's like. You've seen these kinds of attacks. Someone's socially engineered you. Now, fast forward to DeFi, I had some of my own money in some of these contracts, and I didn't really feel safe about it. I didn't understand why it was that I should feel confident and secure about these contracts. And so I started asking all my friends, talking with my CTO friends, my security auditor friends, my hacker friends, okay, well, how are we doing this today? What's the standard? What's the practice? And in the course of that, I realized that we had huge gaps. This did not make me feel very safe about my own capital. And I thought, okay, if I have this problem, this is a really serious problem. If it makes me stay up at night, if it damages my health, if it gives me anxiety, I'm absolutely sure that this is the case, or even more so for a lot of other people. This problem needs to be fixed for DeFi to really grow. And so we're like, okay, well, let's build it. Let's create the end-all solution for bug bounties so that we have this new piece of infrastructure to protect everyone.
What was the timeline for that? When did you go from idea into Immunifi?
I had my first inklings for various multi-sig protection tools, things like token of token models, things like trusted networks of assets so that you can surface some kind of token in the same way of like a CF today. That is a representation that you can halt at some point in case there is some malicious action and reverse. In a lot of ways, that's how parts of the existing financial system work. I had those in 2017 and 2018 when I first discovered the problem of, okay, there's a lot of assets here and you're putting them in particular contracts that you may not have a lot of faith in. So something like the Gnosis multi-sig was quite a new product back then and also quite difficult to use. There wasn't this reputation of trust and security. If you were putting your money in the Gnosis multi-sig, you were concerned about it. And this concern is well substantiated. Like we had the whole parity multi-sig debacle leading to the loss of what is now billions of dollars in assets. So I had those first inklings about, okay, what do I do? How do I have assurances of securing this code back then? And then, it was only when I started really diving into the workflows for figuring out how to secure contracts early last year that I realized, okay, what are all the tools I have at my disposal for making sure that the code is secure, that it only works as intended? And that I came to the conclusion that bug bounties were the most versatile and the least mature tool in our arsenal.
So the most opportunity there to build a project that solves that need. Curious, as you ran down that list, and this is current events for the THORCHain community, but what were some of those other tools that you might have weighed against like a bug bounty program?
Sure. Think of yourself as a DeFi developer making some or another protocol. You want to go and ship something and you want it to work exactly as you envisioned it. But life is unpredictable and coding is hard and designing things is hard. How do you know if anything, literally anything goes wrong, your fault tolerance is near zero because the asset that you're dealing with, the information that you're manipulating is literally money. So how do I go and prevent that? Right? Well, my first tool is having a great team, great skills, great practices. And so we see that in the CTF challenges in the community, in Open Zeppelin's content, in Trail of Bits tools, like all these little things, fuzzers, static analyzers, whatever, that you can go and fix things yourself. Your next layer is internal code review. So hopefully I have someone in my team who's basically, a QA engineer who's constantly monitoring for quality, but thinking like an attacker while he does that. It's a little bit unusual, but we see this in traditional web corporations as well. It's not that different. So hopefully I got that. Next, what's my next tool? So my next tool in the toolbox is Audits. Now, no matter how good I actually am, I can't really be sure of that, right? So I just got to have some unwarranted confidence in my own ability to use static analyzers like Critic or Slither. But then I go to auditors, I basically have the same problem. So now I'm going to external code review by someone who does this all the time, right? And this is the same thing as having a great QA or security engineer on board, but now he does this all the time. This is his job. He thinks about this forever. There's a whole team of them. And I've got to go and pick an auditor or several auditors. But it's really hard to ascertain who's legit and who's not. It's hard to ascertain that they did a good job on this particular run. And it's hard to ascertain whether they're going to find novel attack patterns. So usually, if you're someone who's really good at security, you're going through checklists. A lot of it's just process oriented, right? You're being really thorough. You're doing unit tests on everything. But I also need someone who's really creative, who can create attack patterns that nobody's ever seen before. And there's no way for me to demonstrate, unless he finds something really interesting, that he has that skill and took that mind. So I use that tool, but I can't measure its effectiveness either. Now, the next tool in the toolbox I have is formal verification, which is a souped up version of auditing. But formal verification is finicky and an extremely high skill task. And it's very hard to find people who can do it. So the main providers today are guys like Satora, Runtime Verification, and I can pay them. And it's a great product, but I have to be able to basically go through a full audit that's even more hands-on and pay a lot of money. Now, these are all progressing from free with using tools yourself to phenomenally expensive with very nice audits. But it's at this point that my security stack basically stops. The tools I have as a DeFi developer, I don't have any more. At best, I have maybe automated monitoring, okay, that can alert me, and maybe a circuit breaker that I custom built. And I pray that the circuit breaker itself isn't a vulnerability, because if the hacker's creative enough, it could be, right? Maybe I build those in, but there's nothing off the shelf for that. Zeppelin just recently built their Sentinel tool, which provides some automated monitoring, which is really cool. But even then, my ability to use that to protect myself is not great, because if I could identify the likely attack pattern that I would receive, then I wouldn't need the automated monitoring tool to catch it, right? I would just build my system so that it was impervious to that probable attack. So I'm tracking some things, but it's not that useful. That's my tool stack before I get to bug bounties. The last tool I have now is the bug bounty program. But before we came along with Immunifi and started building that out, nobody had any idea how to run a program. You pull everything from web security and just kind of guess, oh, well, they pay $10,000 per critical on HackerOne, so I should try that. And you just kind of YOLO it. This is the environment that our project was born into, this kind of immaturity on the bug bounty side, where there almost were no good particular standards. People hadn't really thought out the problems, and there were no great workflow tools.
And so, let's talk about what does that look like if someone who has no familiarity with bounty programs or, crowdsourcing this kind of audit, but they might ask, why is this necessary? Why can't a protocol just kind of roll their own, or a smart contract developer roll their own? What value add does Immunifi bring to the table?
That's a good question, because there are levels of what roll your own there mean. The first level is, should we even have a bug bounty? Why shouldn't we just trust in our own work? Which is cute, and it seems legit until you have, $100 million in your contracts. And you're like, wow, if I did anything wrong, it's literally all my fault. Nobody feels good about that. And so you want as many other parties in protecting you as possible, right? Going to auditors, going to internal code review is one version of that. Going external code review or friends of yours to review your code is an extension. Auditors are the third extension. Bug bounties are just like the maximal extension of that, the greatest possible version, where I say, I want literally everyone in the world to look through my code and try to crack it, and I will pay you all for it if you can find something. So, that's why you shouldn't roll it your own in terms of just trusting that you'll do a good job and YOLO your deployment. But the second example, okay, you decided to do a bug bounty, you want to throw it out there, why not roll your own there? The reality is that running a bug bounty program is actually extremely difficult. So suppose you're a great engineer, you've designed a wonderful product. Do you know how to handle the customer support element of dealing with tons of hackers? Do you know how to validate that a report is likely going to be real? Do you know how to structure your bug bounty program so that the rules are clear and make sense? Do you have a pulse for what the market rate is and what might actually incentivize the developers? Do you know how to assess what assets that you actually need to protect and what are just nice to haves, and therefore what kinds of vulnerabilities that you need to prioritize and incentivize locating and disclosing. If you're running a super sensitive DeFi app, you're not doing yourself a whole lot of favors by having a ton of web application vulnerabilities in scope. That's not of value. That's not what you need. Then you have, okay, a bug report comes to you. Now you need to know what to do about it. The standard response by most projects is to be highly adversarial. Well, lo and behold, this is not appreciated. It does not create a very good user experience. So you don't know how to handle the first contact. You don't know how to handle the negotiation process. You may not even know how to handle the proper sizing of the impact. How should we be looking at pricing this vulnerability as a financial asset? All of these questions, like these very niche workflows, are extremely important to get right in our space. And almost nobody knows how to deal with them. Very few people have experience dealing with any one part of it. So what we do at Immunifi is we basically take the best practice for each different workflow, from the standards and how you want to handle the communication, to the workflows that you want to be going through and the processes you want to be going through, to how to look at the negotiations, the fixes, the communications around it. And we take care of all of this for you. That's the value proposition, making it, what could have been an extremely stressful process and hard to run system, basically effortless.
And I imagine, from your vantage point, you get an industry-wide view of best practices, what works, what doesn't work. And then that informs these programs that you implement on behalf of your clients and customers.
That's correct. Thousands and thousands of reports we have run through the gamut.
When did Immunifi officially start? And then, so how many months or years have you been around now?
We launched the product in December 2020, actually.
Right on. And in that timeline, how many customers, clients have you worked with? And you mentioned you've done thousands of reports. Are those reports that have, from other programs or that have gone through Immunifi, reported through your system?
We have about 130 customers, and, the context of those will vary widely. We're going to have DEXs like Sushi Swap. We're going to have synthetics products like Synthetics itself, or lending products like Cream Finance or Compound. But we're also going to have wallets like Jura wallets, and we're going to have layer 2s like Fuel. So a lot of different characters in the bunch, a lot of different adventures. Now on the report side, in that time, right, in the months that we've been around, we've processed probably about 2,500, 2,600 reports.
That's wild. That's in 9 months. That's crazy.
So every day has some new action to go and deal with. Not all those reports are valid. Certainly most aren't, but a lot of them are. And each one of them is a bit like a fire drill. Something's urgent. You got to go put out the fire.
And then what does that look like? What's the flow of a report? Are there engineers on your team that are doing a first pass vetting? Does the project or the client in this case, do they have to sign off on something before any value is transferred back to the white hat? What's the flow of a typical report?
So whether we're involved directly will depend on the choice of the project and the hacker. Some projects may want, hey, I want you to end-to-end encrypt everything. And so we make it very easy for you to encrypt your communications. And it's like, okay, well, we can't see it. It's not our problem. But many other customers, they want us involved in the process so that we can smooth out any rough edges, alert them if there are any problems, help mitigate any vulnerabilities, and warn as needed. So let's look at the latter example, right? Suppose, I'm project A, I run a yield aggregator of some kind. I have various pools of assets that I'm using to farm. Now, if a critical vulnerability, or at least a bug report espousing a critical vulnerability comes into the system, we are going to take the first pass at it, usually doing a screen, making sure it's legit, or if it's not. You can measure our response time typically in 1 to 2 minutes. We get the bug report. If it looks legit in that 1 to 2 minutes, we are going to immediately surface that to the team. Hey, look, we got a new report. It's very serious. Here's the thing. We'll have channels and backup channels for getting in touch, basically like an emergency response system, if you will, for getting in touch with the projects and making sure that they're aware of it. In that, we may also give our assessment of it. Hey, we're not sure if this is real, but it looks pretty serious and the potential impact could be enormous. You should really look at it right away. that kind of thing. So that's the first part of the flow.
And then from there, project looks at it. Now, actually, I guess we might have skipped a step. Before any bug reports start coming in, when you start the engagement, I assume you work with the project and iron out what the rules of engagement are going to be, what types of bounties, where on the protocol or in the application we're focusing, what the potential scale for rewards might look like. Assuming all that gets ironed out and then bugs start to get reported, what is the process of greenlighting? Like, okay, this is worth a payout, and how much do you decide how to pay out?
I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. Like there's all this stuff that happens beforehand in the program creation, ironing out the details. That's really where payout decisions are created. It doesn't happen by the time the asset comes in. It happens right there. You can think of every bug bounty as an offering to purchase a diamond, but the customer, the project in this case, doesn't know exactly what kind of diamond he wants. He only knows the general class of it. So he's like, I want this class of asset, but I can't tell you exactly what it's going to look like. So anything that meets this criteria is good enough for me. And here's how I measure its value. Okay, effective yield attack. Okay, that's going to be a high. Anything that has access control rights. Okay, that'll be a critical. Something that creates, enormous gas fees or gas optimizations. Okay, that might be a low. Anything that leads to theft of funds, that's definitely going to be a critical. And he's going to look at pricing it according to different measures. For example, we might set an arbitrary number on a low, medium, high vulnerability. But for a critical, that's the really sensitive stuff that we really want to protect against. For that, I'm typically going to look at a percentage of the total financial impact it would have. So I might say what's a good example? I think XDAI. XDAI has a $2 million bug bounty up to $2 million payable in stake. And what's the key measure for determining if you can get to that cap? Well, we want it to be 10% of the potential assets at risk. So if you have, say, a vulnerability with a potential financial impact of $15 million, then the maximum bounty for that would be $1.5 million. And this way, the whole pricing of the bounty has already been decided at the part of setting up the project, setting up the program, and setting expectations around how to run the program, right? And then the only question is, does this particular vulnerability, does it really do what the hunter says it does? Does it have that financial impact? Can he steal that money? If so, okay, done deal.
And is that evaluation of the validity of the report, is that generally on your shoulders, or is it consensus between you and the project? Who gives the final, this is a worthwhile report?
The projects always make the final decision on the matter. And this is their money. They can decide to pay out. If they don't want to pay for the asset, that's up to them. But of course, then the hunter can do whatever he wants. So it's up to them if they want to buy whatever it is and to set the ultimate price. They're welcome to propose whatever they want to the hunter ultimately. We jump in very often to help broker the process. So this can often feel like a bit of a negotiation. And by introducing a party like us, we smooth out all of those rough edges and say, no, this is market standard. You should think of it like this. This is the kind of relationship you two could have going forward. Therefore, you guys should look at a price like this. And this will often speed up the transaction markedly. That's our role as a mediator.
I don't know if you guys think this way as much as, I come from the SaaS world and customer success or account, management. We look at certain KPIs or metrics that indicate that our product or platform or services is doing what it says on the label. I'm curious for you, is it that easy? How do you measure success in a program like this? Would it be number of bug reports? Or, I guess that's not in your control. It depends on the security of the underlying network. So how do you think about customer success in a service like this?
The most important measure is bug bounty payouts. So if we're paying out large bounties, then the customer is getting exceptional amounts of value. Every time you have a critical vulnerability, yes, we like to say it's the second worst day for a project. The worst one being getting hacked, the second worst one being told that you could get hacked imminently. But when the project gets that kind of quality asset, that kind of vulnerability, and can subsequently patch it, and they'll pay out a corresponding reward, they always do, that's a remarkable success. They've just stopped probably the most dangerous possible kind of attack and threat to their future. So that's the first measure of customer success that we look at. The second one that we look at is the speed and the ease of closing the transaction. So we're looking for a smoothness of experience. We want the projects to be very happy with the quality of the reports and to just be like, this guy's legit. He's done a great job. It's very clear what to do. We want the hacker to feel the same. This project is above board. They treat us very well. And so we're looking at all these little measures around timing, around the smoothness of the experience in general to evaluate customer success.
That sounds great. I think it makes a lot of sense, that kind of experience flow for the different constituents in the ecosystem. You mentioned that, response time for a report might look like 1 or 2 minutes. You also mentioned that you had 24 to 2,500 reports within 8 or 9 months. So we're looking at 10 reports a day on average, like 300 plus reports a day. Mm-hmm. That's an incredible amount of inbound. What does your team look like? Like how big is the Immunifi team that's kind of receiving all this inbound?
We're about 24 people at this point. And that's split between engineers, hackers who are helping with technical work on a regular basis, admin support personnel, everything we need to run what is basically an emergency response system for these DeFi projects.
Awesome. Glad to hear it. And I'm curious, do you have any particularly crazy or interesting or notable reports or stories of things that your team has uncovered? I'm sure out of 2,500, does anything stand out?
Do you want to hear dramatic stories?
What do you got?
When you get a serious critical vulnerability, what is often the case is you're now in a race against time. Like there's a reason that we have that level of response time and that we are able to get in such contact. And the reason being that we need to go and mitigate this because it's imminently exploitable. Now, when that happens, and there's no easy fix, right? There's no pausing of the proxy. There's no, I just move it, to the multi-sig. There's no, stop using these contracts. When that happens, and there's large amounts of money at risk, and you can't turn it off, which is often the case for these permissionless projects, you now have to do a white hat. What does that mean? It means I have to hack my own contracts to steal my own money in order to safeguard them from a black hat hacker taking the money for them. The moment that happens, it becomes a race against time. So case in point, primitive finance. This is a permissionless options protocol by a gentleman named Alex Angel, and he's very good. They're a great high quality team. But they made this lovely options contract in such a way that it was vulnerable to a particular kind of flash loaning if someone were to go through artificial Uniswap pools for creating the underlying assets in the options. And he didn't put an off switch on the protocol. Subsequently, we, him, and the DDoP guys, along with a friend of ours, Emiliano Benassi, we had to go and white hack the funds ourselves, which means we spent 48 to 72 hours, depending on how you look at it, assessing the vulnerability, crafting the perfect exploit, preparing communications, doing whatever it took to make sure that we could execute this attack as quickly as possible, as safely as possible, and that we could save everybody's money. That's a war room. 48 hours later, the job was done. But, it's weird to steal millions of dollars from yourself, because that's the right thing to do.
It calls to memory, I was just reading The Infinite Machine, Camilla Russo's book about the story of Ethereum. And she recounts how, during the DAO hack, there were some white hat teams on the Ethereum side that were looking to race against the DAO hack, put all this money into this limbo, this balance. I think there was a 21-day period before the funds could be moved again. And in that period, there was some sort of recourse where they might be able to execute some sort of path to kind of reclaim some of those funds. If I remember correctly, the details escape me. And there was this kind of limbo period. And I also remember there was almost this open legal question of how legal are these white hat engagements? But I guess, it sounds like from you guys, especially if it's under the shelter of the work that you're doing with Immunifi, this is a perfectly legal thing. It's just kind of emotionally stressful, or what is that like?
Well, the first thing to note, that whole DAO hack dynamic, that is exactly what happens. You feel this incredible pressure, this stress, this anxiety, and this responsibility in a race against time against a faceless opponent that you have no idea where they are, how fast they're moving. From time to time, you might see examples if they're testing out contracts. And if you do, you're scared shitless because someone else is onto the same exploit that you are. But, how does it feel? It's like, if you've ever been dealing with some crisis situation and you go into a state of focus and there's, enormous stress and every decision matters and you're worried about it, and everyone else, they get a little bit in a state of mild shock and you're having to work through it all. That's what it's like. That's what it's like. Now, we are legal, make no mistake. But like the key to that, and this is probably useful for anyone, any DeFi developer who gets involved in the space and has to deal with this situation, it's critically important that the developers of the protocol themselves are the ones to push the button in. And that way it's like, look, you created this, you need to solve it, take responsibility for it. It's also the best signal of confidence to the community that you will make it out, that you've done a good job, that you've done the best you could. But, we don't want to take the liability of doing the attack ourselves. Nobody does. The best way is just for the protocol to take responsibility.
Yeah, pushing the button, air quotes. It was the big open question in the DAO hack, like kind of right. The white hat team. They were like, who's pushing the button? Who is actually going to execute this code? Man, that's wild. And so across like 2,500 reports, 130 customers, are you guys always just on edge? What is life like at the helm of Immunifi? Like, I have to imagine that there's always something going on.
Well, you got a good intuition. There's always something going on. Look, you get used to it. Our role is emergency response. We're the sheriffs of DeFi. We're basically firefighters. And, the first war room, you're on edge. The second war room, you're getting a little used to it. You're learning a bit, but you're on edge. By the time I'm at my sixth, seventh war room, it's just another day. And at this point, we're well beyond that. So most of us, we've done all this before. This is just our job, our duty. We're soldiers in the line of battle, and we're disciplined and trained. I'm not going to say there's no pressure. I mean, there's always pressure, but now it's no longer an anxiety of, do I know what to do? Can I make the right call? No, I know I can. Now it's more like, damn, this is a lot of responsibility. We better make sure we get everything right. So it's that kind of pressure of becoming super focused, going in on the details is what we all become in our line of work.
Yeah, I appreciate that. On to the topic that brought us kind of into contact with one another. Obviously, this is a podcast that focuses a lot on the THORCHain ecosystem, and THORCHain, through the course of July, had a series of attacks. In the response to those attacks, THORCHain came up with a 5-point plan that included, among other things, bounty programs, specific bounty programs geared towards specific parts of the protocol as they bring the chain back online and then each integration point back online, and then also an ongoing bounty program for business as usual, extending into the future. Can you provide any insight into the work that you're doing with THORCHain? What does that program look like? And what that engagement looks like overall?
So the short version of that is we run a bug bounty program for THORCHain with what I believe is a 500,000 exactly rewards of up to $500,000 for critical vulnerabilities. Now, THORCHain is almost exclusively interested in critical vulnerabilities. So it's either put up or go home with this one. And we're working with the gentleman at 9 Realms. So they're working with us on the program to monitor everything so that in addition to the THORCHain developers and 9 Realms and us, we've got 3 sets of security personnel and expertise looking at any serious bugs that may come through the system. Very much like the whole function of this is to be a very well, let's say, very credible secure disclosure line emergency response system.
I know as like the founder, you're probably not focused on any individual account as much as administering over the whole business, but would you be up to date on like the specifics of the THORCHain account? For example, was there already a vulnerable bug that was reported through this program?
Well, we are in general very discreet. Privacy is important, security is important. So we're not willing or interested in sharing any information that the project isn't ready to disclose. So for example, any vulnerabilities that are found in the project, ask for the details on those. That's up to the 9 Realms team to decide that they're willing to disclose. Naturally, we encourage that. What I can say is, yes, there has already been activity.
Yeah. So one was already shared publicly from the THORCHain team. And it was, I don't know if it happened through Immunifi or if it was before the engagement, but I think it was reported and was being remediated through 9 Realms and perhaps you guys as well.
Yes.
Fascinating. Well, it seems like this is a space that, already, our 130 customers, are you guys at capacity or do you have bandwidth for more? And how do you grow from here? It seems like this is going to be something that as DeFi grows, it was going to be an inevitable part of the future with tremendous amounts of demand. How do you guys think about how you can scale into that over the coming years?
So right now we provide a very, hands-on white glove service, making sure that each and every project is in the space is taken care of. They receive the best care, the best support, best practices up and down every single workflow in creating and managing a bug bounty. We can do that because DeFi is so young. And, up until earlier this year, there were only 100 or so projects. But now we're going into a future where there's going to be thousands and tens of thousands, and it's not going to be feasible in the same way. So our work is steadily shifting towards what we're more excited about. What we're trying to do is we're trying to open up our technology, automate as many of the workflows that we can so that everyone knows how to deal with every product, that every best practice is built into an out-of-the-box experience, and then move all of that infrastructure, all of that process to a permissionless network that anyone can plug in and play any role in. So today, Immunifi is a bug bounty platform where we facilitate the transactions. In the future, Immunifi is a protocol where the community backing the protocol are facilitating the transactions. And that's a potentially limitless number of people. And if we can pull that off, then we can create this on-call security mechanism available to the entirety of DeFi. That's what we're really after, a permissionless security solution.
Path to decentralization, staying true to the ethos of the world of decentralized finance that you serve today. Well, first off, today, do you mostly see the bugs that are being reported? Are you a marketplace where you have like a supply side of hackers that are almost like, I don't know, I hope this isn't too crude of an analogy, but like Upwork contractors, and then people come and post gigs, and then there's a community of Immunifi hackers that are constantly like shopping the menu? Or do you see people coming in like fresh? Like how many of the thousands or hundreds of reports that you get a month, how many are from repeat people that are in your community versus coming in as first timers? And yeah, is it like, do you have that network built out?
That's the question from someone who knows how such businesses work very well.
Sure.
But yeah, okay. So you could absolutely think of it as a supply and demand side. So you could think of, we have a supply side of programs, right? And then we have a demand side of hackers who want to take it. And we're constantly in this balancing act, getting more programs and then more hackers to service those. We are always building and growing our hacker community. Today, it should be the largest in crypto by a wide amount. Like we're in the many thousands at this point. But, having said that, in terms of reports, you're going to see a disproportionate number of reports come from a small number of people. So it's your power users here, your professional hackers, the people who are really like to think like an attacker, and they have this stake in doing this work. It's in cracking what is like the world's most interesting and lucrative puzzles. Those are going to be the people who submit most of the reports.
And then psychologically, this is a different person. Ostensibly, the top performing white hats in the Immunifi community, they have the chops. They could be out there. Hell, they might be out there also doing black hat stuff. But something, my instinct that I'm kind of framing into a question here is like, is this a different psychology? Like maybe they have the chops, but they don't want to be exploiting. Maybe they have some sort of like philosophical or ideological reason for supporting DeFi as opposed to exploiting it while still employing their skills. Is that instinct kind of correct? What leads to someone who has these chops to be doing this white hat with you guys as opposed to black hat on the lam?
It is correct, but there's also a larger picture. So, especially with the hardcore white hats, they have exactly this. Not only do they have the skills, do they have the chops, but they've also got a very firm moral backbone that drives most of their activities and most of their choices. That's where you're going to see guys like, Banteg. He has certain beliefs about how the world should be, and he has the skills. So he's going to go out and help projects the best he can. You've got that population of white hat hackers, but you've also got these gray hats that are kind of in between, a little bit more mercenary. Yeah, they'd like to help people, but they also need to make money and survive. And if you have to pick their interests over your interests, they're going to pick theirs. Now, we actually deal with both of those. So we have the large white hat community that is, I would say, very upright and very high integrity. But we also have these gray hat users who are quite in it for the money. And in their case, why would they do this instead of stealing the money? Well, in a lot of cases, we can provide some of the world's most compelling rewards in clean and legal money. It's riskless to them, whereas to go and hack something introduces a lot of risk. Now, if you're a black hat group like the Lazarus group out of North Korea, or some of these other hacking operations in the former Soviet Union or in the Middle East, then you don't care, right? It's a business and you're always going to attack because you can just take the money and wash it. But if you're, a lone wolf, if you're kind of a drive-by guy and it's just a crime of opportunity, well, to have a very credible and compelling legal alternative is vastly preferable than stealing the money and taking the indefinite risk of having committed a serious crime. And so, those guys are also going to be contributing.
Got it. Yeah. That's fascinating. And I think this is super current events because not only are we coming out of, a series of exploits in THORCHain, but was it this morning or was it yesterday? The Poly network exploits over $600 million. I'm sure you're following that story. What's the latest there? The hacker didn't seem to have a clear strategy for what to do with the winnings. I don't know if you've been following there. Can you provide any insight onto what's going on there?
Yeah, that situation is very odd because the attacker on Poly market, and for context for everyone, there was about $600 million stolen across BSC, Ethereum, and Polygon, and an attempt to steal more on Hecko, but that didn't work out. For context, so the attack took place, and then there was these strange communications that were going on live on chain, where he received a tip from an anonymous member of the community, then he gave him a reward, and tons of other people started tipping. That was an oddity. Like, clearly this guy enjoys being in the limelight to some degree. But the real oddity happened when he started becoming compliant and talking about returning the funds, answering a Q&A, explaining his motives and how his only interest was to protect the project, which is very odd for someone to say who just stole $600 million from everyone. So the suspicion as to why and how this is all happening in the way it is, I should note for everyone's benefit, like the hacker is considering giving back all of the money or most of the money that he stole.
That's crazy.
It's crazy, but why would he do that after committing what is definitely, at the very least, a gray action by stealing the money in the first place? Why would he do that? What's driving that? Most probably someone has doxed him and found out his identity and said, look, you should find a way to make this all go away. And now there's this whole unfolding drama. Maybe it is something else, but, as outsiders to this situation following along, not privy to the private conversations between Polymarket and the attacker, we can't know.
Yeah. And all I can say is when I saw that number, there are people that haven't been a part of protocols that have been exploited. And then there are people that have. And now I'm in the latter camp where like I've seen my baby get just get kicked while it was down multiple times. And when I saw that news, I was just like, oh man, just my heart goes out for that community and that team. Cause it's like, we ostensibly, we know the risks of investing in DeFi. And that's why we have these, amazing returns, potential returns, and that's also, it's on the label, Chaos Net. But so that's a logical or rational understanding that we enter into these opportunities with. But that doesn't help when the exploit actually happens. And there's this like emotional response where it's for a lot of us, and this is where like maximalism comes from. It's not even just a financial or an economic exposure that we have, but a lot of times it's like near religious, it's like an emotional exposure or a social exposure. These are our communities. We have friends. We spend all day engaging with the people and making new, associates through these communities. When these exploits happen, there's a community that like just takes this like kind of hit. And so like my heart went out for them. I'm like, man, knock on wood for the community there, for the Poly network. Like I saw just before this interview, before this call now, like that there's a chance that the funds might be returned. I'm like, oh my God, like only in crypto, only in DeFi. What a crazy turn of events. Nah, man, that's so funny. So yeah, thank you for that insight. And I'm sure, this will be a field that is growing alongside DeFi, this issue of security, both at the protocol level and at the individual level. And so it's great to connect with an expert here. And we'd love to continue to chat with you, like maybe check in with you in a couple months or every quarter or so and see how things are going with Immunifi going forward. Before we wrap up, I'm curious, like looking at trends, crypto and Web3 and DeFi moves so quickly. I'm curious if you could share with us anything that you've seen emerge that has changed over the course of the year 2021, and then what you think we might have to look forward to in the realm of security or audits for the years to come. Anything in particular jump out to you?
Well, you're fortunate when like your baby is in many ways on the leading edge of security. But this new 5-point program that they're doing is a foretaste of things to come, where you have professional auditors and security experts checking your code 24/7, checking every commit, where you have a very large and significant bug bounty program constantly driving hacker interest to your code bases, reviewing them to see if anything can be found, where you have periodic audits, where you tighten up your development pipeline, where you do everything you can. You have a foretaste into what many projects are going to come to discover that they'll need. But it also gets better. So in a lot of ways, the tooling in this space is maturing very significantly. So formal verification, which is something almost nobody did, in 2017 or 2018, is now becoming a thing. Professional service providers are doing a bang-up job. I wouldn't be surprised if THORCHain got some formal verification done over the next 6 months. It'd certainly be pretty effective, in my estimate. And then you have, better, let's say, automated monitoring tools that can integrate with circuit breakers and predict them in some way. I have a very strong feeling something like that is going to come out. So what if, when people are submitting bugs, what if there's a larger data set, a larger pool of information that you can map incoming transactions to the mempool to see if you need to flip the circuit in advance. I believe that kind of tech will be coming out over the next 6 to 12 months, which should be pretty exciting. And then you have further extensions to bug bounties, which of course is our bread and butter. So we have matching programs, like we work with Armor Finance, Nexus Mutual, and BSC with its Priority 1 program to do larger and larger programs and get more and more people into security. That's new and supercharging the bug bounty space. You also see more developed toolings and more fairer markets. Like as word gets around, we're starting to see more and more of these gray hats decide that they want to disclose peacefully, that they want to offer up the information, provided they have a trusted mediator like Immunifi to go and do it. That's less on the technology side, but it should be even more effective than a lot of the previous measures. All of this is happening inside of a 12-month span. So, where security will be in 12 months from now, I don't know, but at the rate it's moving, I think it's going to be a hell of a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have it looks like we have a path to decentralization to look forward to for Immunifi. And so it'll be fun to follow along. Do you have a timeline on that, by the way? Like conceptually in your head, like what time frame that might happen over? Or is this sort of like an abstract idea so far?
We launched the first part of our protocol in May, I believe. So we've been building out piece by piece as we make sure that we fully understand each part of the problem and how it needs to be solved. We build out a new piece, we test it out. Now, I'm hoping that we can launch something much more exciting and comprehensive before the end of the year is my target. So looking at, early fall or winter to launch something that really has never been seen before in terms of multi-chain security product. But you're just going to have to stay tuned for that. Hopefully, I'm still around in a few months to talk about it.
I love it. Here's a little alpha leak. Well, we'll happily stay tuned. Speaking of staying tuned, where can people go to stay tuned and find out more about the work you're doing?
So the best thing that people can do is to follow the Immunifi Twitter account. That's where we're most active. And that's at Immunifi, at IMUNEFI. So we'll post information about security tips. How do you secure your Telegram? How do you secure your Discords? How do you deal with various OPSEC challenges? Right down to postmortems on the most exciting new vulnerabilities and commentary on hacks and what you should do about them, how you should be dealing with them, how you should be treating them. So if you want to see our work, see what we're building, see how we contribute to projects, see our accomplishments, following our Twitter is the best way to do it. And I guarantee you, if you should decide to do that, you will learn a whole lot about staying safe in DeFi in the process.
Love it. Thank you so much, Mitchell. This has been illuminating. We appreciate the work you're doing with THORCHain. You're part of, like you said, this 5-point plan that has given the community and the network so much strength and hope going forward. Thank you for joining.
My pleasure to work with THORCHain. This is a great project.
Take care.